Okay. Well, hi everybody. It is me, Jace, and Julie back again for another week. Um, this week, obviously, our prompts are discussing postmodernism, and social construction, right? So kind of diving into a little bit of that, I wanted to start with a reference from our textbook because obviously this is school. So we got to throw some of those in there. But it talks about how one of the biggest ideas in postmodernism is that reality is subjective, right? It's shaped by our experiences, our relationships, and a lot of our cultural context, where we grow up rather than being like an absolute truth per se. And that's kind of a relatively big shift from traditional therapy models, right? That assume that there's just like one right way to understand mental health issues. Sorry, I burped. I'm so sorry. Um, so what do you guys think about that? Sorry.
No, you're good. No, I think it's true, right? Like, I work as a pastor in the church and we talk a lot about like what is truth, and how truth is different for everyone, in a lot of ways. And I think it is really framed around like what your experience is and how you show up in the world and like what your social location is and that sort of thing impacts your reality. And so we can't just assume everybody's experience is the same whenever we're like the world is becoming increasingly more diverse.
I 100% agree. And when I thought about this, I didn't even think as far as like thinking about people all over the world, right? I thought about like even with my siblings, like I have four older siblings and we lost our dad 16 years ago. And so I was 18. They were older than me. And so just like that, dealing with grief and having our own experiences and our own truths, like we all dealt with it differently and we've all viewed it differently. We've all had arguments and everyone's perspective is so different and it's not even, and like we could all be from the same culture, but we take different things from it. And so, and especially me being the youngest, I think I'm a little more removed from it. So my ideals and ideas are a little more, just open and, accepting versus my sisters, they're a little more traditional. So I
Hmm.
even thought of it in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Michaela?
Absolutely.
You read us the quote. You got to tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, well, and I was thinking about how this kind of plays out in therapy, right? So, like, if a client says, I feel like a failure, a traditional model might challenge that belief with like evidence, right? Whereas, like, a postmodern therapist might ask more of like, well, where does that idea come from, right? Who told you that being successful has to look a certain way, which kind of shifts that focus from like how meaning is created rather than just disputing thoughts, right? It kind of, obviously they go a little hand in hand, but it really kind of dives into where the thoughts are coming from and the whole thoughts as a whole. And I mean, that also kind of ties into social constructionism, right? The way that we understand ourselves and the world. It's not just personal, right? It's shaped by culture, relationships, language, all these different things, right? That's kind of another thing that they mentioned in our textbook. And in therapy, this means that problems aren't just like inside a person, they exist within a larger social context.
Yeah, I, my wife and I talk a lot about, how like gender is a construct. And we see
Yeah.
people doing these like gender reveal parties. Um, and if that's something that you want to do, like that's totally fine. That's your thing, right? But I think about how like I mostly shop in the men's department, like the men's department in stores, because
Hmm.
I do think like the way that we interact with the genders or being non-binary, right? Like it really does come down to the expectations that are put on that gender because of culture, right? Like women can play football, women can like trucks and like I don't know, men can like makeup and painting their nails. Like it's I think as we are growing up and like millennials are now like in their 30s and having kids, we're seeing that a little bit more played out in how like some people are raising their kids to be like not in like enforcing a certain gender stereotype or a gender
Hmm.
construction.
I
Hmm.
agree with that. I think especially since we're evolving, it's like we don't have these gender roles anymore, or um, these we don't have to live up to these expectations of who we should be as a woman or as a man. Even though, I mean, there's still some things that I think we need more progress on. But I agree. It's like you do these gender reveal parties, but at the same time it's like now we're trying to kind of merge and have it kind of more universal. And so I could see, I never thought about that until you brought that up, but that's that's a good point to make. I also I thought of it when applying to therapy and just kind of understanding like the client's experiences and just their life experiences, and then giving them solutions based off of their own life experiences instead of a generalized like, oh, you should do this, you should do that, but make it more detailed to that person or to that client that you're talking to.
Yeah,
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Jace.
no, sorry, Michaela. I was just thinking, I think that's why we spend so much time in this program talking about like how to be culturally informed and aware as therapists so that we aren't like forcing assumptions on our clients based on their social location, but are able to be like present and ask them questions and help them kind of unpack like what is it that their reality is and that they're experiencing and how that's impacting like whatever mental health situation they're in the midst of.
Absolutely. Well, and kind of like you said, being cultural aware, kind of taking these thoughts into account about social constructionism, right? So, like, for instance, it's like if a woman of color is struggling with imposter syndrome, right? In this case, it might not just be about her self esteem, right? It might also be about the cultural messages that she's received about who belongs in certain spaces, and whether or not you are, you know, whitewashed versus black versus white versus mixed. There's a lot of identity intensity in there, right? And so therapy, in a social constructionist framework, wouldn't just address the confidence, it would also kind of acknowledge that broader system that's at play generally in our society and some of those roles, kind of like as Julie was saying, that we kind of feel like we need to fit into.
Mhm.
Almost like the fixed idea about like how things and like how their identity, behavior, and mental health should be. I think it allows us to be more empathetic, right? So instead of looking at your client and being like, oh, that's a huge problem, like that's a permanent problem, instead you can see like how their past experiences, how their how their the society influences them or their culture influences them. So that way it's like you can help them work on changing it instead of being labeling them and being like, okay, this is who you are, and not fully understand like where they're coming from. uh,
Mhm.
so I think that's the reason why I really enjoy learning about these two concepts, just because I think it'll allow me to be more empathetic, a little more understanding, more open.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I
Yeah,
think
I really like, oh, sorry. I know,
no,
sorry to
you go,
interrupt
you
you.
go, you go.
I was gonna say, yeah, I really do like how, the whole postmodern approach allows therapy to be a little more flexible and more culturally responsive. It acknowledges that mental health isn't just about individual experiences. It's shaped by relationships and culture as a whole. Go ahead, Jace. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just thinking, like, our country is so divided right now, and I think it's because people are kind of like leaning into those beliefs that they hold and not being open to like hearing other people's perspectives or recognizing that other people's realities might be different than your own. I think we're seeing that, left, right, center, no matter where you are politically, like people don't know how to talk to people who are different from them.
Yeah.
And I think that shows like how important it is to be that culturally aware therapist so that you are able to like see clients that think differently than you and,
Yeah.
encourage them to maybe talk to somebody who's different than them too, right? Like it's all about being aware and open to the people around us.
Yeah, almost like looking at as more of a learning tool versus, something that would pit you against somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think those are some pretty excellent points, guys.
Well, good job, team. Let's all go into our evenings and celebrate our own realities.
Yay!